Before we continue with developing plugins, I want to finally talk about how hooks, actions, and filters work. This lecture will demystify the concepts behind these topics. Understanding hooks isn't all that easy. This is because the terms themselves are rather tricky to visualize and distinguish from one another. Once you understand how everything works, then you'll be able to understand how WordPress works. I find that working with filters and actions is probably the most common way I interact with WordPress. As time has passed by, it's become one of my favorite things to do in WordPress. Understanding the terms is half the battle. The WordPress codex uses all three terms very casually and inconsistently. I'm going to try to clarify those uses here. These are what the terms really mean, although you will find them used differently in many places. Let's start to define the terms. The topic that we're discussing is what WordPress calls the plugin API. Despite the name, these concepts don't apply to plugins exclusively. In previous sections, we used action hooks frequently, so this also applies to themes. Sometimes you'll hear this API referred to as the hooks API. Hooks are the dominant concept that we need to understand to make WordPress actions and filters work for us. So what exactly is a hook? A hook is a place in WordPress's code that can get functions added to it. When you create a hook in WordPress, you give yourself and other developers the opportunity to add in extra functionality at that location. Hooked functions are the pieces of external code that can be added into WordPress's processing at the locations specified by its hooks. In other words, these are the functions that get hooked into WordPress. Basically, you could think of hooks as events. These events are accessible to us and we can execute functions during those events. There are basically two types of hooks: action hooks and filter hooks. Action hooks can do any type of custom functionality. This includes sending out emails, updating the database, or just output something onto the screen. Filter hooks modify existing output. You're basically given data and you're expected to return that data or a modified version of that data. You can even return a brand new set of data. Good so far? Don't worry either way, and let's move on. I'll show you some examples soon enough. To explain hooks, we will think of WordPress as a big factory. The factory kicks on whenever a visitor browses to your site and manufactures the specific web page they've asked for. The page generated has the contents of one or more posts, as well as a header, footer, sidebar, and so on. By the way, WordPress as a factory is probably the best analogy there is for how WordPress works in general. It's almost a literal description of how WordPress actually works, except with digital factory equipment, aka PHP files, and raw materials, aka the database contents. We can think of custom code as outside contractors that help the WordPress factory do its web page assembly work. Hooks, both action hooks and filter hooks, are the gateway into the parts of the WordPress factory where these outside contractors go to do their work. The core WordPress software is a rather simple factory. There's also a lot it can't do by default. Everything from display today's date at the top of every page to create e-commerce product pages complete with price, shipping, and payment information. WordPress can handle these special orders, but to do so it needs outside contractors. This is where functions.php, other custom code, and plugins come into play. Our contractors don't have a permanent place in the factory. They're stuck in the lobby until they're invited in by the factory itself. Hooks are how this WordPress factory invites in any contractors that may be needed. We can think of WordPress hooks as a bunch of actual giant factory hooks, which the contractors write on, like this image. Each hook is labeled with a specific name, such as WP head, corresponding to a part of the WordPress factory's process. In the case of WP head, the process of building the page's HTML head section. These hooks travel out to the lobby so that contractors can write them in, and they do it in a specific order. The WP head hook travels out to the lobby and back right before the head tag completes. Likewise, the WP footer hook travels to the lobby and back right before the body tag completes, and so on. The contractor is always writing his hook directly to the active, to be worked on part of the factory. When a contractor wants to be part of a specific process, he waits for that hook to show up at the entrance and rides that hook straight into the proper part of the factory. If the contractor didn't ride the proper hook in, he couldn't get to where he's going in the factory. Hooks are what invites outside code into defined areas of WordPress's PHP processing. We're halfway to understanding hooks, actions, and filters. The other part is a bit more specific. The factory has two kinds of hooks, action hooks and filter hooks. The action hooks tend to get dangled at milestones, like you're almost done building the page's head section, or you're almost done building the page's body section. When contractors ride action hooks into the factory, they tend to do just about anything they want. Add a bunch of stuff to the page, or do completely other things like log an error or even send an email. The filter hooks work a bit differently. Contractors who ride in on action hooks can do whatever they want and have no responsibility to anyone. But contractors who ride in on filter hooks insert themselves in the normal worker's process. They're given something to handle, say a block of text, and have to give that same block of text slightly modified back to the regular worker via a PHP return statement. A contractor using a filter hook generally doesn't just do whatever he wants. He works with the piece of code that he's given in his section of the factory. This section works on the post title, the sections manager might say. Do whatever you want to the post title, but if you don't hand me back the post title after you've made your changes, then this whole process won't work properly. I hope I'm making sense so far. Now we're going to get a bit more technical, so you can start writing these things. The contractors are specialized PHP functions. Because these functions make it into WordPress by attaching themselves to WordPress hooks, that is, being hooked in from outside, the formal term for them is hooked functions. Enough talk. Let's actually write some code to take a look at what all this looks like. I'm going to create a brand new plugin called hooks-example.php inside the plugins folder. I'm not going to create a folder for this plugin as everything will be contained in this one file. Also, since this is just an example, I'm not too concerned on organization. I'm going to set the plugin name to Hooks Example. Activate this plugin and let's get started. I'm going to use the function addFilter. This is how filter hooks are started. You tell WordPress that you would like to filter particular data by calling this function. This function has the same parameters as the addAction hook. The hook we want to use is called the title. This hook runs when a post is being displayed and its title is being outputted or returned. The function I want to run is called JUTitle. Let's define this function now. Filter hooks will always have at least one argument. In this case, the title is passed on to us. This is the original title. WordPress expects us to return this title or a modified version of this title. Alternatively, we can give a completely different title. I'm going to return the text hooked followed by the original title. Save your work and visit the homepage. You'll notice all our posts now have the text hooked before the title. Let's take a look at action hooks now. We've already done this a bunch of times in our theme, but let's take a closer look. I'm going to create an action hook. I want to hook into the WP footer hook. The function I want to call is JUFooterShoutout. Define this function underneath and echo out hooks example plugin was here. Save your work and refresh the page. Scroll down to the very bottom and you'll see the message outputted. One thing you'll notice about action functions is that they do not need to return anything. They don't even need to echo out anything. You can do whatever you want from querying the database to sending out an email. The code in here can work behind the scenes. Filter hooks, on the other hand, must filter data or modify it. If you don't return anything, then you can end up breaking WordPress. Think of it like this. If you need to modify text or data before it's used, then you should use filter hooks. If you need to perform custom actions, then use action hooks. In the next lecture, we'll take a look at how to create our own custom hooks and prioritizing hooks. By doing this, we'll see how hooks work more in depth.